Welcome, Jay, to our first official podcast on the channel.
Yeah, it's great to finally be on here and give it a whirl.
Whirling dervish, as we call it. So I think the intention here is just going to be tackling the main topic, which is why near-death experiences and why the channel. Certainly when I tell family or friends that I'm doing a YouTube channel on near-death experiences and what happens after consciousness or the soul, what happens after the body dies, people seem perplexed and confused, alarmed, and usually take a step backwards. But they often ask, why are you interested in near-death experiences, or what is that? So we did just do a shoot with a couple of cameras with our camera guy for the home of our YouTube channel, where we talk about how we got into near-death experiences, our own journeys into this space and interests. But this being our first podcast, this is another more casual way where you and I can rap about what we're doing here and why. So maybe I'll ask you first, Jay, when did you discover near-death experiences and what did that do for you?
Yeah, so I first discovered near-death experiences. I was working at a bookstore, a local independent bookstore in Los Angeles. I think during college, summer break during college, I was maybe like 19 or something. And I was supposed to be shelving books, that my boss was like, shelve all these books. So I'm like crouched over in these little back rooms and back shelves. And I just had in my hand suddenly Betty Eadie's classic, Embraced by the Light. Embraced by the Light, which is a real old school classic foundational NDE. And I just remember sitting crouched over with all my stacks of books to shelf, just reading. And I just couldn't put it down. I took it home. The cool thing about working at a bookstore is you can like take 10 books at a time back home. So I devoured it over the next couple of days. But I do remember my boss like finding me back there, like, where's Jesse? Why is this taking so long? And I was just hunched over reading.
Did Dutton's have a good NDE selection?
They did. They had a pretty good kind of metaphysical, spiritual section. So I, of course, was like asking to order all these kind of books, put a plug in.
Huge demand for,
yeah. It all seems to be one buyer, Jesse Estrin, an employee. But, ever since then, I started reading them. I'm sure I tried to tell you about them back then. I'm not sure if you really read any. But I started reading mostly the books. And then, maybe 5, 6, 7 years ago, 8 years ago, I started like watching them on YouTube. And of course, that's when I finally managed to get you indoctrinated. That must have been 2017, winter of 2017.
I suppose so. Yeah.
Yeah. 5 years about.
Yeah. So you've been on this journey a lot longer than I have. Fairly.
I mean, but to be clear, you were interested in all these things too. Philosophy, religion, mysticism.
Yeah. Well, I was interested in all of that. And I became very interested in Buddhism. And so I started doing meditation retreats, silent meditation retreats since college. So that was my zone. And in particular, I wasn't particularly theistic. I didn't believe in God, even reincarnation.
I mean, but I will just say, you're the one that actually gave me Ramakrishna, Paramahansa Yogananda, Ram Dass,
That's true.
Ken Wilber, St. Francis. So
Got me there. True.
You were pretty into that, around that time. And then I think you started moving just more deliberately into the mindfulness Buddhism.
Yeah, that's a good reframe. I've forgotten in a way about that, but it's true. I discovered Yogananda and Ramakrishna in high school and then college. And then I did a big thesis paper on St. Francis and all of that. And then I was most passionate about Buddhism, and the more retreats I did, the more kind of mindfulness based, which really is all the same thing. That's what I think we both believe, ironically. But for 10 years or however long, I steadfastly refused to watch any near-death experience videos you sent my way or read any books because, to me, it's like Buddhism is like a neat little package of philosophy or religion that like feels safe and is interesting. Lots of teachers and reading. NDEs are this kind of modern, even though they're not modern, approach to spirituality. And it's like so individualistic, each person's experience, that it's not boxed. It's not structured in such a way. So I think that was part of what turned me off. And I was kind of dubious or skeptical, I think, for a while.
I remember that we got in some arguments about it, the existence of the soul. And you were like, Buddhism, there's no soul. It's just, we're all interconnected. And yeah. So do you want to share about like, yeah, your first, when you sat down and you actually connected with these NDE videos, what happened for you? What shifted for you, maybe?
So yeah, 2017, you and I took a trip to Assisi in Italy, and you and I managed to duck out for 3 or 4 days early before meeting up with the rest of our family and partners. And on the airplane, I was trapped. There's nowhere to go to. So you made me listen to, it was a Jewish rabbi's NDE account, Rabbi Elan, who's a character and has a fascinating near-death experience. And it pretty much hooked me. And once we were there, we're going to these beautiful churches, St. Francis's caves and sacred sites. And we listened, you showed me a bunch more people on YouTube giving their testimony or stories of NDEs. And a light went off for me, in which I believed the authenticity of each person. I didn't think they were lying or exaggerating. And then there was a lot of commonalities and themes that were emerging spontaneously. And that mapped on to the old worldview of Christianity on all these frescoes and whatnot, angels, beings of light. And it really had a very powerful impact on me. I mean, that was when I shifted from my interest from Buddhism, just evolved into more of a theistic practice, I guess, again, to God and spirit. And so what impact do you think watching or reading about near-death experiences, how does that help your spiritual practice?
Yeah. I mean, well, it goes straight into the question more broadly of like, why NDEs? And I just want to like double click that, because that is the question I get also whenever I tell my friends, our family, like, people are just like, interesting. Okay. Like, why NDEs? And I think it's an interesting question because there are so many realms, right, around spirituality, and like people are interested in all sorts of things, shamanism and sacred medicine work, or psychics and mediums, or ancient history, UFOs, aliens, Buddhism, what you name it. So like a lot of people who are even interested in this realms of spirit and spirituality are just like, why NDEs? And I think for both of us, but it's something about it being evidence-based. It's kind of anecdotal evidence or phenomenological evidence. It's not hard evidence, because science is kind of operating within a specific realm of needing hard scientific evidence, but it's people's direct experiences. And often these are life-changing. People have had their lives are upended by it. It's often hard for them to come back and integrate with their husband or wife, their spouse, or their family, or their work. A lot of times their lives are altered forever, usually in very positive ways. Some of these folks were like atheists or kind of secular, materialists beforehand. And I just think they're very compelling. It's good storytelling. It's like people's stories and their lives, and, it's always a compelling thing. But I also think it's kind of like a modern day form of mysticism. There used to be prophets or mystics throughout history in different religious traditions, and they would kind of have an experience or vision. Maybe the indigenous shaman would have a vision, but the vision wasn't for just them. The vision was also for the society, for the collective. And I think a lot of these people having these experiences, it's kind of like they're sharing it. It's almost like medicine or inspiration for all of us, that there is something much bigger going on. There is a realm of spirit and spirit that surrounds us, and we can lose sight of that because we're all just caught in our day-to-day lives. But it's actually gives a lot of hope and a lot of inspiration.
Absolutely. I agree with all of that. And it's fascinating because a lot of the people, they're told by the light, by loved ones, by Jesus, by God, that they have to come back to their bodies, to their life, in order to talk about their experiences, and that's just what you articulated so well. That is what I feel when I listen to a story of a near-death experience or read a book. I feel inspired, just like when I read Yogananda or any great mystic. I feel inspired I feel more connected to spirit and God around me. And that's very tangible and has concrete cause and effect in my life. I can feel supported. I can rely on something greater than me, as well as, taking care of my body and my family and everything else. Yeah.
Totally. And I think, it's kind of like, it's this interesting phenomenon. People die clinically often, although there's many cases where there's no doctor there, like monitoring their hearts. And so it's not clinical in that sense, but there are many cases of people on the operating table in a hospital where they're just clinically dead, no heart rate, no respiration for minutes at a time. And they come back and they can talk about being floating up in the hospital room above the doctors. They can report back with the nurses, what the doctors have said. But they just have these varying, very different, almost no two NDEs are alike exactly, but there's common themes. And it just is like a very fascinating thing. And I do think some people are skeptical, and we talk about this. It's kind of like, okay, when I watch or listen to somebody's powerful near-death experience, it's kind of like, okay, there's really just three ways this could be. They're either telling the truth, they're lying, they're like pathological, either consciously manipulative or just brainwashed and confused and lying, or they're, delusional. It's kind of like consciously lying, unconscious, which means they're delusional, or it's a real experience. And the thing is, I think if some people, kind of like you watch one and like some people don't know what to make of it. Like, well, that's interesting. I have no way of evaluating if this is real or if this person was just lack of oxygen to the brain. But then if you start watching or listening to more of them and you start to see how they kind of have similar parallel things, it's a very compelling phenomenon to study and learn about.
That's right. I also think some people think it's just like a dream state, like it's not real but one of the beautiful things about these experiences is often people come out and the doctors, the family will be like, okay, honey, like you just came out of heart surgery. That was the medicine and they're like, no, like I had hallucinations and I can tell you what those hallucinations are. I've had dreams. I can tell you what dreams are. And this was neither. This is what they often call hyper real. They talk about hyper reality, which is on the other side where the consciousness goes, our soul goes. The senses are 1,000-fold. So smell, touch, taste, sight, plus all these other senses, because we're limited to this body. And the color, they all talk about all these incredible colors, music, sounds, everything's like 1,000 times more defined and subtle than here. This is like a two-dimensional like puppet room. And that always caught me too, is like the hype, like they felt more alive there. Hence they would often say, it was like coming home. Oh yeah, I'm back home. You wake up from a dream. Great, I'm back home. That was just a dream. Like, this is where I belong. That's primarily their experience. And then they get shoved back into their body. They often argue with the divine beings. They don't want to come back, but they're kind of told to, or some choose. A lot of them choose to.
Yeah, I like that about the hyper real. I find that really interesting too. And I do think it's, this connects to, so both of us have studied comparative religion. I majored in comparative religion in undergrad. I did a master's program in philosophy and religion. And both of us have read a lot of literature. And so it's something that's like, this is all rooted in lots of ancient traditions, in the Vedas, in the Bhagavad Gita, in Hinduism, in the early Buddhist scriptures, in the early Christian texts. Judaism, Islam, Taoism. So there's many texts the world over around the soul and how the soul will leave the body, in indigenous cultures around the globe. The shamans they would go leave their body and get messages and come back, but they would navigate these whole realms. Very few cultures actually believed that this 3-dimensional physical gross world was it. Nobody
Yeah.
believed this was just it. There was always these layers superimposed of more subtle realms.
And a big one is indigenous cultures, like, which I don't know that much about, shamans and shamanism. When I did learn about it, when I did some ayahuasca and some ceremonies, and they straight, leave their bodies, go into trance states, and travel distances and heal sick people and fight demons and do all this work in this reality, but in a different metaphysical way. It's fascinating and beautiful. So you're right, a lot of parallels. And this is what you and I talk about around, this is like maybe a new kind of scientific approach to spirituality. At a time when most historical traditions, many different religions are losing credibility. So much abuse, so much trauma, betrayal, dogma, fundamentalism, stuff that's like not accurate and causes great harm. And hence a lot of lack of trust and people leaving all the churches and different religions. So that's what excites, you and I often talk about how this feels like a new frontier. That's in essence the same.
And it's really, these experiences it's the kernel, it's the seed within all religions. It's the mystical core. All the other stuff is like husks of like dogma and ritual and the hierarchies of these religious traditions. But the mysticism of these direct experiences, that they're like the mystics of all traditions. St. Francis, St. Teresa, like Padre Pio, or any in the Buddhism and Hinduism, a lot of the mystics were kind of eccentrics, and were like often seen as like crazy people. And then only later they're canonized or recognized as saints. So I think there is something about that. And you and I are interested in religion, but so much of religion is dogmatic and like old and covered in cobwebs. Young people in our generation, millennials and Gen Z beneath us, nobody's like interested in joining religions. It's old and seen as like just super problematic. So we're always in this conversation about what's the next? How do people connect with spirit, find community, connect with the cause, with God and spirit and the angels in a way that's fresh and new and alive.
One of the most fascinating parts of near-death experiences that really hit me was what's called a life review, because that's one of the most common things in near-death experiences, NDEs. People die, and most of them, I would say, have some sort of experience where they're shown or they relive their entire life from like birth to the current moment of their death. And not only their own experiences, but they're living other people's experiences of them. If you were mean and yelled at a dog or another kid in third grade, or you pushed someone in high school, you would experience it directly, what that felt like. And this is part of what the soul's journey is. This is sort of like the message is our souls incarnate here on earth in order to grow through developing love, patience, joy, generosity, all these things. And the life review is some form of like cause and effect or accountability in a sense. And they all say they're not being punished by the light or by God. They're punishing themselves. But I bring this up because it's another link to traditional religion, which is, the worldview of ethics and morality. Like actually, even if we're in a postmodern world and we don't believe in religion, but we are open to near-death experiences, they essentially say the same thing, which is, love your neighbor, be kind to others. Buddhism, generosity, Dhamma, like there's these kind of laws of metaphysics that are principles that our souls have to operate within, just like the physical body needs food and light and stuff.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, we've talked about this, and we actually want to dedicate a podcast to Plato. But when I first picked up Plato in the Republic, 5,000 BC, 2,500 years ago, it's the first fully recorded near-death experience. And Plato and the ancient Greeks, their philosophy was deeply spiritual in the sense that it was about these other spiritual numinous realms. And being a human, we're a soul that incarnates on this human earth. And that NDE unpacks what it means to live a good life. Of course, Socrates was all about what constitutes the good and the beautiful and a good human life. And it's around morals and ethics and your conscience. And That's the soul in Plato's view. So just like I always think it's so important that these are cross-cultural and like cross-religious. It's different contexts, different languages, different cosmologies, but it's the same thing that these near-death experience, that these life reviews are talking about: how to live life with virtue and integrity. And in the modern world, these words have lost so much meaning: virtue, or like ethics or morality. But throughout history, they've been very important: to be generous and to be kind, to be loving, and vice versa. If you're cultivating what was called vice or sinfulness in the Judeo-Christian tradition, you can accrue really bad karma. I mean, of course, we love the Buddhist and Hindu concept of karma. That's a really beautiful and sophisticated understanding around action and repercussions of action. But yeah, vice and virtue, and how to live a life that, the ancient Egyptians had like weighing of the scale in the bardo state and after death. So there's just lots of interesting ways that humans throughout time have talked about this and understood it.
So you and I became avid readers of near-death experiences and listeners to people's stories and podcasts. What was the moment, and why? Maybe you can talk a little bit about why we decided to launch our own channel in this space.
I mean, yeah, well, we would always send each other videos like, watch this one. Oh my God, this one is crazy. We would laugh, send each other stuff. We would obviously share books. We both have been pretty fascinated about it. Reading an NDE account for me can put me straight into a very deep meditative state. I can go meditate and pray and have like a deep, it like inspires reaching out to the God of my understanding. And I remember we were together last summer and we started talking about things. And then you wanted to show me a clip of NDE, this guy, David McGinley. Mm-hmm. And we started watching him, and we just both kind of, I was like wanting to watch a movie or just go hang out, and you were like, let's watch. And I was resistant. And as we started watching, it became quickly apparent, like it just brought us right into a deep state of inspiration, of excitement. We started talking about it. We'd pause the video, and it was a perfect encapsulation of what NDEs do for us. It like inspired us. It got us excited. It was touching. It was moving. It was exhilarating, really. I mean, it's really like sci-fi, this kind of stuff. It's like The Matrix. Everyone loves The Matrix because you like wake up out of the Matrix and there's a whole other, like, that's actually what we're talking about. A lot of people don't think that's real, but when you contemplate that as real, it's actually amazing.
It's like the quintessential good news. It's like, guess what? This is good news because what happens after death is like infinitely better than this.
Yeah. Hyper real. That metaphor is forever giving of like, this is the dream and it's being awake on the other side. It's like that sleeping awake metaphor is wonderful. But yeah, so we started getting inspired, and then the conversation naturally arose. Like, what if we started a channel ourselves? What if we started filming and storytelling people who've had near-death experiences? What if you and I did a podcast to talk about it, to bring people on? And yeah, we went back and forth. Like, is this something we want to do? And what could we contribute? But we just ended up feeling like this is so incredible to us. We also want to bring it out to a wider audience. We want people to take it seriously. We want to share it within the community that's always already interested about this stuff, and just participate and have fun, like a learning journey, like us getting to geek out and talk to these people that we really enjoy. And what about you?
Yeah, I would say for me, it was really like, what's a way that we can give back to the community rather than just listening or reading and feeling inspired for myself? What's a way we can contribute to this? Almost like a movement, like most people still don't know what this is or are very skeptical. I think we're both like diehards. Like we just believe it 100%. I'm sure there's a few accounts that are spruced up here or there, maybe some lies, but we just believe that this is the reality of the truth of what happens. And so I think it's tangibly helped me in my life, both of our lives. I live a better life, a more full life, knowing that I'm not alone, that I'm, being guided, and that I'm being held to account, and that there's something greater, and it gives me purpose and meaning. And even if at the end of the day, it's not true, I'd rather live my life accordingly than not. But I do happen to believe it's true. And so I think the other thing is what you said, which is help people that have had these experiences tell their stories, to give them space, like a sacred space, to take their time in exploring and explaining what their experience was, and if there's any messages from that. And so there's a lot of podcasts out there. There's growing YouTube channels, and there's some that are done more professionally with a little bit higher production value. And so we thought, why don't we practice and try doing it that with a good production value that looks good and that's appealing and that can maybe reach a wider audience. And then the podcast just for us to geek out on together and bring guests on and explore.
Like Anthony Cheney, right? We collaborated with Anthony and we worked with him a bit, and we both are huge fans of his channel, and he inspired us, and we loved that look and that feel of like telling these stories in a way that's classy, professional, beautiful. So we're hoping to do something like that. I think another thing that's interesting to note, is that our mom passed in the beginning of 2020, the very start of COVID, not from COVID, from cancer. But we were both very much, that was a profound and very difficult, but also deeply spiritual and impactful experience of walking her home. 6 months of hospice, years of cancer treatment, and 6 months of hospice, and then literally holding her hand when she passed. She was in a coma or just unconscious for several days. And then she suddenly opened her eyes, leaned forward, squeezed our hands, and took her final breath. And after that, there were these chimes and bells ringing all throughout the backyard. We all were like, what is going on? It disappeared after 30 seconds. But like a lot of people tell these stories about people who experience phenomenon with the dying person, but they're not dying themselves.
Shared death experiences. And maybe that's a part of that, those chimes and bells that we experienced with her death. But I think that really impacted both of us and really kind of galvanized us, like maybe, to start doing a channel like this. Yeah. And that speaks to something you've often talked about, Jay, with me, around, because we watched Mom go through an intense amount of anxiety and fear and panic around dying. And it's a brutal process in many ways, but to see her through to the other side and where we believe she is now, so to speak, that's another reason we wanted to go ahead. And even though there's other channels out there already and these stories being told, it's not for ego that we're doing this. We try not to be. We really want to do it to also maybe, if it helps other people. Deal with their anxiety of their own death, of a loved one's death, someone's dying, so they lost someone 20 years ago. It's very impactful to hear these sort of experiences and even entertain the possibility that this is what might be happening to us and our loved ones after we drop the body.
Yeah.
Another part that I'll say about Mom passing is, it was profound on many, many levels, emotional. But then there was this resonance afterwards, and you and I separately somehow got to this rhythm for 8 months or a year where we just kind of naturally woke up at 6 a.m. and we're both a little bit of a morning sleepers. So I just remember, getting up at 6 for a long time and doing deep kind of 2-hour meditations. And it was a powerful deep dive into my spiritual practice. And I love that. And I think it's definitely connected to being with her when she passed and her whole journey.
And I think we both were similarly impacted by her death. And I still think about her. I mean, I feel very connected to her in dreams and just praying to her, talking to her. But I think about death a lot more. I'm like much more conscious about death and dying. And if I hear about somebody who's died, or if I read the news about Ukraine or somewhere in the world where there's a natural disaster, some images. And for a while I was like, shoot, this is really like almost traumatizing, these images of like gasping for air and passing. But that's what I love about these near-death experiences. You can be narrated through that experience. Everyone almost always is traumatic when somebody dies. You can freeze to death, you can drown, you can whatever happens, a car accident. But on the other side is just really a beautiful, peaceful, loving experience. And this is something we talk about. Like we had a friend who was like, oh, why are you telling these near-death experiences that there's such long traumatic stories about people who die? It's very activating for people. It's kind of hard to listen to someone narrate how they drown or die of COVID but we find it fascinating. But it's a fascinating in sense because that's this world with the ego and the body. It is very scary. But as soon as you cross the threshold, the whole perspective shifts. And there's just something so liberating and joyful and amazing about that perspective.
Yes, especially if you believe that that's our true home and that's our natural state. And this is a trial. This is kind of a rough and tumble experience designed for us to grow and learn faculties of the soul that are actually hard to develop in the astral realm, because everyone's so loving, nothing but light and joy and peace. So actually, a lot of them say, and a lot of spiritual teachers say, a lot of souls, we're all clamoring to get into bodies down here. It's so counterintuitive, but there's a lot of need and demand for that, which is fascinating. We'll have to explore that on another podcast.
Yeah. To your point, E, is like a big part of this channel is about helping people have less anxiety and fear about death. Like if we really boil it down, that's what it is if there is this good news about the soul lives on, something lives on beyond death of the body, it relieves so much anxiety and fear. It just kind of allows us to relax and be more quantumous and accepting, especially considering how uncertain the world is between pandemic and war and political polarization. There's just a lot going on in the world. I think a lot of people have fear and anxiety. And at the root of that anxiety is the anxiety of suffering and of death. So I think that's at the root of the vision for this channel and why it is you and I are doing this.
A few thoughts as we probably wind down this podcast. So you and I are therapists. We're both marriage family therapists, and you've done a lot of work in prisons with prisoners doing emotional intelligence work. So this realm, podcasts, videos, storytelling is new for us. So we're learning a lot, and we'll get more into that, I'm sure, on other podcasts. But you and I will be sitting down every couple of weeks and talking about certain interesting topics that we love, such as I'm excited to dive into Dr. Carl Jung's near-death experience. We could talk about Plato's near-death experience. I want to get into some indigenous near-death experiences that we know about. There's many, many more. We'll also be having guests on from time to time as well to pick their brains. They might be interviewees that we filmed into a short film, and we'll have them on to kind of pick their brain about other things that we didn't have time to talk about. And then lastly, we're going to be putting together these short 30-minute, 40-minute film pieces focused on one person's near-death experience. And we do that with some B-roll footage and music and try to make it fun to watch. So those are all the things that I'll be putting on our channel. We'll see what sticks or if people have any interest in that. But certainly this will be a journey that we hope people might want to join us for and give us feedback on.
Yeah. And it's something that, I think we're both planning to, it's fun or enjoyable for us. It's new, like this, we've never done something like this before. We're obviously twin brothers and we're close, but we're just looking forward to this as a fun collaboration, totally a learning journey and like kind of an opportunity for us to get to know people within the community and see what people might want to watch or follow along with us on this journey and, just kind of hold it lightheartedly and wanting to do it respectfully to the community as knowing there's a community here of content creators and filmmakers, but also these NDE experiencers, researchers in the field connected to IANS and beyond. It's globalized, but we're wanting to like participate in it and help elevate these stories, the research, shine a light on it, spread the news, so to speak, and have fun while we're doing it. So excited.
I'm excited as well. And I think you're right about the learning journey piece is like you and I, we still want to learn more about what these NDs are. What are the commonalities, the themes? Why is it emerging now with more modern medicine, technology? And so we'll keep talking about it and seeing what we come up with.
For sure. Cool.
Anything else before we end?
I think this is perfect. Why don't we stop here and we'll pick it up again soon.
This was fun. See you later, Jay.
All right. See you, man.
Ciao.
Ciao.